Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our presentation on labeling requirements for food, cosmetics, and consumer products. I'm Cori Goldberg, and I'm a partner in the Life Sciences Health Industry Group of Reed Smith. Along with my colleague, Sung Park, we represent food, drug, dietary supplement, cosmetic, and medical device companies across the supply chain. We do so in the course of daily regulatory advice and counsel, corporate transactions, litigation, and government enforcement actions. We also assist companies with importation of their products into the United States and help resolve issues that may arise with importation. We are joined today by our colleague, Todd Maiden, who helps clients maximize business opportunities and manage risks associated with environmental, energy, climate change, and ESG sustainability issues. He's our expert on Consumer Product Safety Commission issues, which is what he'll be discussing with you today. Before we get started, I do need to mention that although we are lawyers, we are not providing legal advice today, and your participation does not establish an attorney-client relationship. If you need legal advice, please reach out to us directly so that we can speak further about possible representation. Everything that we say today is also off the record, but if someone wants an official statement, please reach out to us as we may be able to give one. We will be covering topics relating to the FDA's regulation of food and cosmetic products, followed by Todd's discussion of various consumer products. We will also be discussing briefly certain enforcement actions by FDA and private parties. And in particular, please note that there are many more requirements that do apply to these products than just the labeling regulations that we'll be covering. I will start with FDA's requirements for cosmetic products, and then Sung will follow with a presentation on FDA's requirements for food and dietary supplements, followed by Todd's CPSC conversation. Let's begin by discussing certain agencies that have jurisdiction over the types of products that we will discuss. The FDA, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, is a federal agency that regulates various aspects of food, dietary supplements, drugs, medical devices, cosmetics, and tobacco products. The USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, is a federal agency that regulates a wide range of activities regarding producing and marketing of agricultural products and farm animals. Now, somewhat confusingly, the FDA and the USDA share jurisdiction over food in the United States. The USDA regulates the production of meat, poultry, and certain egg products. The FDA regulates the production of everything else. So the USDA regulated businesses are required to have a USDA inspector on site at all times. No inspector is required on site during production of FDA regulated foods. This joint agency jurisdiction gets particularly complicated when you have a food like pepperoni pizza, for example, or a soup. Generally speaking, if the food has more than 3% raw meat or 2% cooked meat, then the USDA will regulate it. Just to make you aware, state departments of health may also regulate depending upon the state and depending upon the activity being performed. Now, we're going to cover in more detail today the specific labeling requirements around cosmetics, foods, and dietary supplements. Medical devices and drugs have very specific, more onerous requirements as far as FDA is concerned. Many drugs and many medical devices require FDA clearance or approval before they can be marketed. And it's very important before you go to market with a product to understand what it is. So certain products like massagers, for example, depending on the intended use of the product, may or may not be regulated as a medical device by FDA. And depending upon the class of that medical device, that will dictate whether something called clearance from FDA is required before going to market or not. And part of the clearance or approval process for these types of devices and drugs is that labels typically must be approved by FDA, and only those labels and the approved labeling statements can be used. This is important because requirements under FDA laws and regulations are different for each type of regulated commodity. And we first need to define what a product is in order to determine how it's regulated. It is a product's intended use, and that's a very specific term of art, intended use, that determines how a product will be regulated. Cosmetic is a product that is applied on the body for cleansing, beautifying, or otherwise altering the appearance. So any product that you use to achieve these types of purposes will be regulated as a cosmetic product. On the other hand, if a product has a different purpose, for example, if it is trying to cure a symptom or an illness, it is likely an over-the-counter drug or prescription drug. Or, for example, to block UV light, that is a sunblock or a sunscreen, that will not be a cosmetic product because the purpose is not to cleanse, beautify, or alter the appearance. So a food is any product that is used for food or drink. It's anything that you use to satiate hunger or thirst. Now, interestingly, a supplement, a dietary supplement, is a product that has the purpose of supplementing the diet through a vitamin, mineral, herb, botanical, amino acid, or other substance. And under the FDA laws and regulations, a dietary supplement is a type of food, and the requirements that apply to supplements are very similar as those that apply to food. So as we will discuss, there are specific rules for labels and labeling, and those are different, with which products must comply. These rules determine the type of information that must be shown to consumers, as well as the manner in which they must be displayed. These rules serve two purposes. First, it ensures that consumers receive accurate information. And second, it helps to ensure safe use by letting consumers know what is in the product and what the product should be used for. FDA also regulates claims. So as we discussed earlier, cosmetic products are products that are intended to beautify, cleanse, or otherwise alter the appearance of the user. For this reason, if a product has other intended uses, it is no longer regulated as a cosmetic product. That brings us back to that sunscreen example. If you're trying to prevent damage, if you're trying to prevent disease, you are now going to be elevated to a drug category, and the specific requirements for drugs will apply. Likewise, if a product makes claims about causing your lashes or causing your hair to actually physically grow, rather than making your lashes or hair appear longer, it is likely no longer a cosmetic under the law. So it is nuanced, and it is important that you seek assistance before going to market with your claims. In addition, ingredient safety is a requirement. So manufacturers are required to ensure that all cosmetic ingredients are safe. This means that you must possess sufficient documentation to demonstrate an ingredient's safety. Cosmetic products must also comply with what's called current good manufacturing practices, or CGMPs for short. This means that they must be manufactured in a sanitary facility using sanitary equipment and tools. They cannot contain any adulterants. They cannot be exposed to or contaminated by pathogens, for example. And also, this is important. This is a distinction for cosmetics. Facility registration is voluntary. Many companies do choose to register their facilities with FDA, but this is voluntary. So today we are going to be discussing the first two topics that are highlighted in red on your screen, labeling and claims. But again, if you have any questions about other topics, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Cosmetic labeling. It is critical to ensure that your product is labeled correctly. Failure to comply with the labeling requirements will mean that the product violates the FDA laws, and specifically, it will constitute a misbranding violation. So in short, misbranded products cannot be sold or marketed. Products that are labeled incorrectly cannot be sold or marketed under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and its implementing regulations. So we've put here for you on the screen some of these labeling requirements. The first is the statement of identity. Put simply, this is the statement that informs the consumers what the product is and what it does. The statement of identity can be expressed in terms of the common or usual name of the product, a descriptive name, or if the nature of the cosmetic is obvious, only then a fanciful name. So the statement of identity here for this product on your screen would be cleanser. As the consumer, when I go to the shelf, I will know what to look for because it says cleanser. The second requirement is the net quantity statement, and that informs consumers how much product is in the container. There are very specific rules around it. It must actually be in the bottom 30% of the container, of the outer container, And there are very different font size requirements depending on how large the label is. So it's important to know what size your product will be, what the bottle will be at the end, so that you can make sure when you go to your printer, you're giving the right font sizes. The declaration must be in the American system. So for example, fluid ounces, ounces, pounds, etc., followed by a metric declaration in parentheses. So here you'll see on the screen, it says 11 fluid ounces, 325 milliliters. Product labels must also include a list of the ingredients. So in particular, the names of the ingredients must be in a very specific order. It must be in the order of descending order of predominance, meaning whatever is most in that ingredient goes first, whatever is least goes last, and so forth, from start to finish. Now, the inclusion of ingredients that are not in the list would render the product both misbranded and could be adulterated as well. Misbranded because your label is not accurate. There's something in the product that you didn't tell people was in the product. And adulterated potentially because there's something in that product that doesn't belong there. One issue that many companies get wrong is one regarding color additives. So we put that here as a sub-bullet for you. Specifically and importantly, only color additives that are approved by FDA can be used in cosmetic products. And we'll have more on that in a little bit. But finally, the last bullet here is that you need a declaration noting who the manufacturer or distributor is. It can state manufactured by or distributed by, or if you don't want to include the manufacturer or distributor's name, then you could use phrases such as manufactured for or distributed for. And there are some other appropriate wording categories. But at a very high level for cosmetic labels, these are the general requirements. As I mentioned earlier, each ingredient that is used in a cosmetic product must be safe. And the manufacturer needs to have information that shows that the ingredient is safe. So you can't guess. Now, this is oftentimes not an issue for ingredients with an established safety profile, like water, for example. But if you are using a new ingredient, you need to either develop independently or discuss with the ingredient supplier the safety information for that ingredient. On a similar note, this is the reason why FDA permits only the color additives that are approved to be used in cosmetic products. Now, color ingredients that are not approved should not be included in cosmetic products that are sold in the United States. And this is important because this is one area where each jurisdiction's rules oftentimes differ. So one ingredient that is lawful in Korea may not be lawful in the US and vice versa. Included here on the screen for you are examples of lawful color additives subject to certain conditions of use, but we certainly don't mean this list to be exhaustive. And last but certainly not least is claims. So every company is excited about its products. They want to sell the product. They want to let consumers know of the product's effectiveness, particularly marketing departments. What kind of fanciful language can we use to make our product stand out from the shelf? This is where we need to be careful. And this is where most companies get into trouble. So for example, if you have a cosmetic, the product labels should not include any what's called structure or function claims. These are claims that describe the role of a product in the structure or function of the human body. So an example would be this product increases elasticity. You're actually saying that there is a change being made to the human body. This claim is true. It should still not be used on the product label because if you are making that claim, FDA is going to say this product is no longer a cosmetic. It's likely going to be considered a drug, for example. Likewise, a cosmetic product label should not claim effectiveness with regard to diseases or health states. So for example, this product helps prevent skin cancer. Again, this will elevate your product so that it is regulated as a drug, and you will be subject to more specific requirements. Companies often say to us, well, what if I don't say it outright? What if I imply it? Will I still get in trouble if I'm not explicit? The answer really is yes. Many clients have tried this. Many companies have tried this. Implicit claims are also considered unlawful, and they're typically low-hanging fruit for plaintiffs' attorneys. We also want to note, I started with different agencies and highlighted food. It's more than FDA that matters on advertising as well. So we need to think about the Federal Trade Commission or the FTC when we think about advertising, because both FDA and FTC have jurisdiction over the advertising of products. And ensuring that products advertising complies with laws is important because product advertising that is misleading in any way or inaccurate is violative, often both from an FDA and FTC perspective. From an FTC perspective, all claims must also be adequately substantiated at the time that they are made, and failure to do so will subject your products to plaintiffs' attorneys' lawsuits. And in fact, sometimes this is a bigger risk to a company than FDA enforcement because it becomes very expensive very quickly. We've unfortunately seen companies have to pay 5, sometimes 6-digit settlements just to make these issues go away. So just in terms of some recommendations, as a best practice, you should have a promotional review committee that, as a requirement from a company process perspective, must review and approve all claims before they are made on a product. This committee should be comprised of or should include external or internal compliance and legal professionals, because the rules apply to the product themselves, but also websites, brochures, and what your sales reps say. So you heard me say before that labels and labeling are different. The label is what is affixed to the product. The labeling is, generally speaking, everything else. So even if everything on your product labels is lawful, if you have sales reps going out to the market and making unlawful claims about your product, you are likely to have a legal issue. So it's very important that you develop a compliance system that is systemic and established to ensure that you can catch critical errors both before the products are released and then after, once they're in the market. You should also make sure to have strict control over your distributors to the extent possible, and to audit your distributors to make sure that they're not making risky statements. Another way to do this is to do due diligence on suppliers and on distributors to see if they've gotten in trouble in the past, as history is often the best predictor of future issues. So with that, I will turn things over to Sung, and he will walk you through the FDA food requirements.
Thanks, Cori. 안녕하십니까. FDA 법에 관하여 자문을 주로 하는 박성원이라고 합니다. 해외에서 수입되는 식품, 제약, 화장품, 의료기기 등 FDA 제품에 관한 케이스를 많이 다루고 있고, 그리고 그 제품들에 대한 수입 금지, 수입 거절 케이스 등에 대해서도 자문을 하고 있습니다. 그런 경험을 바탕해서 오늘 FDA 식품 관련 규정에 대해서 말씀드리고, 특히 그 중에서도 라벨링 규정에 중점을 두려 합니다. 식품에 적용되는 FDA의 기본적인 규정들은 여기 나온 것처럼 몇 가지가 있는데, 이 외에도 특정 식품에 따라 예를 들어서 수분 함량이 많은 음료수 같은 경우 이외에 다른 규정이 적용될 수 있다는 점을 말씀드립니다. 먼저 시설 등록, Facility Registration 같은 경우엔 식품을 제조 또는 저장하는 모든 시설은 등록이 필요하고요. 미국 국내나 해외에 있는 시설 상관없이 모든 시설에 적용됩니다. 제품이 수입할 때 문제될 수 있는 부분이 시설 등록이 되지 않은 시설에서 제조나 저장이 된 제품은 FDA에서 수입을 거절할 수 있습니다. 한 가지 말씀드릴 점은 FDA 등록되는 것은 시설이고 그리고 제품이 아닙니다. 그런데 시설 등록을 그다음 라벨링과 클레임에 관한 부분인데, 이 규정들은 지키기 굉장히 쉬운 편이면서도 가장 문제가 자주 생기는 부분 중 하나입니다. 라벨링 규정이 중요한 이유는 수입할 non-compliance를 찾으면 통관 거절을 할 수 있고, 그 다음 두 번째, 일부 위반의 경우 소송이 걸릴 수 있습니다. 그래서 상당한 페널티를 물게 돼야 될 수 있는데, 문제가 생기면 제품을 수출할 수 없게 되거나 아니면 비용이 많이 들어가기 때문에 알레르기 성분에 대한 표기 역시 중요한데요. 표기가 요구되는 알레르기 성분이 9개가 있는데 이 중에 하나가 성분으로서 제품에 포함이 되면은 반드시 라벨에 그 알레르겐이 들어갔다고 표기를 해줘야 합니다. 표기하는 방식은 두 가지가 있는데 가장 자주 쓰이는 것은 contains milk 또는 contains egg, notify 하는 방식입니다. 표기를 만약에 안 하면은 제품이 리콜되거나 FDA에서 수입 금지가 될 수 있기 때문에 반드시 신경을 쓰. 그 다음에 나와 있는 GRAS와 NDI가 이 기준은 성분의 안정성에 관한 기준들인데 식품인지 기능성 식품인지에 따라서 나눠집니다. 먼저 GRAS, GRAS는 Generally Recognized as 단어의 약자인데 제품 안전에 대해서 전문가들의 컨센서스가 있어야 된다는 뜻입니다. 전문가들, 식품 안전 전문가가 있어야 하기 때문에 상당히 높은 기준에 속하고요. 이 GRAS를 받을 수 있는, 증명할 수 있는 방법은 두 가지가 있는데, 첫 번째로는 FDA에 GRAS 노티피케이션을 내거나 또는 두 번째로는 회사가 자체적으로 검증을 하는 방법입니다. FDA 노티파이 하는 방법은 여러모로 비용과 시간이 많이 들어가기 때문에 일반적으로 대부분 회사는 두 번째 방법을 사용합니다. 그렇지만 두 번째 방법을 사용한다고, 그러니까 자체적으로 검증한다고 해서 이 FDA GRAS 기준 자체가 달라지진 않습니다. 똑같이 높은 전문가들의 컨센서스 기준입니다. 그다음 두 번째, 기능성 식품들에 적용되는 NDI, New Dietary Ingredient라는 기준은 GRAS라는 기준과는 다르게 순전히 그 기능성 식품의 성분이 언제 처음 미국에서 마케팅되었는지에 따라서 성분의 합법성 여부가 결정이 됩니다. 만약 이 성분이 1994년 10월 이전에 판매된 적이 없다면 FDA는 그 성분을 New Dietary Ingredient로 분류하고, NDI 같은 경우는 역시 GRAS처럼 굉장히 까다로운 기준이긴 하지만 최근에는 FDA 규제를 인포스하지 않는 편입니다. 그 다음 CGMP는 위생 제조에 관한 제조에 대한 기준인데요. FDA가 주로 수입 때보다는 제조 시설 어디시나 인스펙션 때, 실사 때 FDA 준수를 자세하게 살펴봅니다. 참고로 FDA 법에는 CGMP 인증이라는 단어가 없습니다. 그리고 FDA에서 제3자가 해준 인증을 인정하지도 않고요. 그래서 여러분들의 시설이 FDA에서 그 인증을 인정한다는 뜻은 아닙니다. 마지막으로 육류가 포함된 제품의 일부 제품의 경우 FDA가 아닌 USDA 규정이 적용되는 경우가 있습니다. 라벨링 규정은 비슷한 편이지만 USDA 규정에 대해서 FDA 규정과 다른 점은 대부분의 USDA 제품은 USDA 허가를 라벨에 대해서 받아야 합니다. 허가를 받고 난 후에야 출시를 할 수 있고, 그리고 그 허가를 받으려면 일반적으로 두세 달이 걸릴 수 있기 때문에 굉장히 미리 준비를 하셔야 됩니다. 또 더불어 육류나 아니면 계란 등의 성분이 포함되면 제품에 대해서 수입 전에 VS Permit이라고 하는 허가를 받아야 될 수 있는데요. 만약에 이 허가를 미리 받지 않으면 수입이 거절될 수 있고, 또 제품이 항구에 도착한 후에는 이 퍼밋을 말씀드린 것처럼 오늘은 라벨링에 중점을 두고 의논을 할 텐데요. 일단 라벨링이 중요한 이유는 규정을 준수하지 않고 FDA가 그 준수하지 않은 것을 하는 경우 그 제품은 미스브랜딩 제품이라고 FDA에서 분류가 되게 되고, 그리고 미스브랜딩 제품은 수입 금지 또는 수입 보류, 아니면 FDA에서 리콜, 또는 심한 경우 경고장 등의 처분까지 받을 수 있습니다. 이 중 하나는 얼마나 심한 위반 사항인지에 따라서 달라지게 됩니다. 라벨링 같은 경우는 FDA가 가장 쉽고, 거꾸로 FDA가 규제를 하기도 제일 쉬운 부분이기 때문에 꼭 제품을 미국으로 보내기 전에 준수 여부를 확인하시는 것을 추천드립니다. 자, 제일 첫 번째 요건은 스테이트먼트 아이덴티티라는 것인데, 이건 말 그대로 제품의 아이덴티티를 뜻하는 말로서 보통 common or usual name, 그러니까 가장 그 제품을 지칭하는 데 있어서 가장 자주 사용되는 단어를 써야 합니다. 여기서 기억하실 점은 스테이트먼트 오브 아이덴티티는 브랜드 이름이 아닙니다. 예를 들어서 허쉬 초콜릿이라고 하는 경우, 허쉬라는 단어는 브랜드 이름이지만 초콜릿이란 또 한 가지 유의할 점은 FDA에서는 어떤 특정 제품군들에 대해서 정해 놓은 이름들이 있습니다. 예를 들어서 밀크 초콜릿이나 화이트 초콜릿의 경우 FDA는 제품들의 제조 공정이나 성분을 정해 놓았기 때문에 만약에 여러분들이 어떤 밀크 초콜릿이라는 스테이트먼트 아이덴티티로 판매를 하신다면은 반드시 그 제조 공정이나 성분이 FDA가 정한 규정에 부합한, 이게 문제가 되는 경우가 몇 가지 시나리오가 있는데, 최근에 논란이 있던 경우는 예를 들어서 알몬드 밀크라는 스테이트먼트 아이덴티티에 대한 논란이었습니다. 우유 밀크는 동물이 생산하는 제품으로 FDA에서 규정을 이미 해놓은 스테이트먼트 오브 아이덴티티인데, 알몬드 밀크라고 했을 때 이게 과연 알몬드 제품인지 아니면은 우유, 기존의 사람들이 생각하는 우유랑 섞인 제품인지 혼란이 있다는 지적이 있었습니다. 그래서 결국 FDA에서는 알몬드 밀크라고 불리는 제품군에 대해서 밀크라는 명칭을 사용할 수 없는 쪽으로 가닥을 잡아 유명하게 한 말이 An almond does not lactate 라고 말하면서 아마도 앞으로 알몬드 밀크 대신 알몬드 음료라고 대체를 해야 될 거다라는 유명한 말이 있었죠. 그 다음 이제 net quantity statement의 경우에는 말 그대로 제품이 얼마나 패키징에 들어있는지를 나타냅니다. 일단 중요한 점은 한국식 매트릭 표기, 그램이나 밀리리터가 아닌 미국식으로 언스나 플루이드 언스로 표기되어야 한다는 점이고, 그리고 그 뒤에 괄호 안에 매트릭 표기가 같이 표기되어야 합니다. 이거는 사실 FDA에서 자주 제기하는 이슈는 아닌데 수입될 때 가끔씩 문제 삼는 경우가 있고요. FDA 규제보다 여기서 유의할 점은 소비자 변호사분들께서 소송을 걸어오는 경우가 있습니다. 또 다른 경우는 용량은 맞게 포함되었지만 이제 그 표기된 용량이 소비자가 다 사용할 수 있는 없는 용량이라고 소송이 걸리는 경우도 있습니다. 예를 들어서 이건 이제 식품의 예는 아닌데 그 회사가 쓰는 펌프가 안의 내용물을 전부 소비자한테 제공하지 못한다는 이유로 소송이 걸린 적이 있습니다. 다음 식품의 라벨에 대해서 요구되는 조항이 Nutrition Facts 패널에 관한 조항인데 이게 오른쪽에 보이는 패널이 Nutrition Facts 패널입니다. 이것은 FDA에서 어떤 영양분이 어떻게 표기되어야 하는지 심지어 선의 굵기나 폰트까지 다 정해져 있기 때문에 그 규정에 맞춰서 준비를 해야 됩니다. 이 패널들을 준비해주는 소프트웨어가 있기 때문에 그 소프트웨어에서 사용된 표를 사용하면 되긴 하는데 항상 맞는 것이 아니기 때문에 꼭 만들어진 후에 FDA 규정에 부합하는지 검증을 하는 것이 중요합니다. 그 다음에 Nutrition Facts 패널에 문제가 생길 수 있는 경우는 주로 이 표에 나와 있는 영양분이 실제보다 많게 표기가 되어 있는 경우, 그 경우에 문제가 생길 수 있고요. 또 그거에 대해서 이슈를 제기해서 제품의 수입을 거절하는 경우가 많습니다. FDA가 그렇다고 해서 내용까지 체크하는 경우는 별로 없는데 지난 8, 9년 동안 선의 굵기가 틀리다고 수입을 거절하는 경우를 한번 보긴 했습니다. 그래서 웬만하면 FDA 규정에 따라서 정확하게 포매팅을 맞추신 것을 추천드립니다. 문제가 생기면 제품 통관 리컨디셔닝이라고 해서 시간과 비용을 상당히 들여서 제품을 다 수정해야 될 수도 있습니다. 그 다음 ingredient list, 성분 리스트의 경우는 성분량에 대해서 많은 성분부터 적게 포함된 성분 순으로 Nutrition Facts 패널 옆에 기재되어야 합니다. 성분 리스트는 FDA가 수입되는 제품에 대해서 가장 많이 살펴본 부분 중 하나고요. 만약에 규정에 부합하지 않은 색소 등이 제품에 포함된다면 FDA가 규제를 가해올 수 있습니다. 그래서 성분 리스트를 보면서 FDA 규정한 부분, 수입 관련 케이스들의 실제 상당수의 부분들이 성분 리스트에서 비롯되는데 여기서 제가 한 가지 드리고 싶은 말씀은 꼭 FDA가 어떤 문제를 제기한다고 해서 항상 FDA가 맞지는 않는다는 점입니다. 예를 들어서 예전에 진행했던 케이스 중에서 스트로베리 웨이퍼 제품에 관한 케이스를 진행한 적이 있는데 수입단 웨이퍼에 대해서 FDA가 성분 리스트를 살펴보다가 이상한 점을 발견하고서 수입을 거절했습니다. 그게 바로 빨간색 색소가 성분표에 표기가 안 돼 있는데 FDA가 말하기로는 제품에 빨간색이 들어가 있으므로 이 제품엔 뭔가 표기되지 않은 색소가 들어가 있다고 하는 거였습니다. 추가로 FDA에서 제품을 가져가서 랩에 테스트했는데 여기 지금 슬라이드에 나와 있는 것처럼 FD&C Red 3, FD&C Red 40, FDA에서 허가받은 모든 빨간색 색소에 대해서 테스트를 했는데 허가받은 색소가 어떤 것도 검증이 되지 않았다고 FDA에서 결론을 내렸습니다. 그러면서 저희에게 통보를 해온 것이 그렇다면은 제품에 그렇다고 해도 제품에 빨간색 색소가 그래도 들어가 있기 때문에 그 색소는 불법 빨간색 색소일 수밖에 없다라고 저희한테 통보를 해왔는데요. 그래서 이거를 어떻게 하나 하고 가만히 생각해 보고 있는데 스트로베리 웨이퍼 제품이고 성분표를 가만히 보니까 딸기 파우더가 있는 거예요. 그리고 이제 FDA가 저희에게 통보를 해오면서 굉장히 두꺼운 랩 리포트, 그러니까 아까 말씀드린 모든 성분을 다 테스트한 리포트를 보내왔는데 그 색소를 테스트한 랩 리포트를 보는데 딸기 파우더에 관한 테스트는 FDA에서 안 한 거예요. 테스트를 안 했으니까 당연히 검출이 안 됐겠죠. 그러니까 FDA에서 딸기 파우더가 빨간색을 낼 수 있다는 아주 간단한 사실을 잊고 다른 색소들만 테스트를 한 겁니다. 그래서 결국 답변서에 빨간색은 스트로베리 파우더에서 나오고 그리고 FDA가 이 파우더를 테스트 안 했으니까 검출이 안 된 건 당연하다고 그렇게 답변을 했던 케이스가 있습니다. 그래서 이 말씀을 드린 이유는 꼭 FDA에서 노티스를 받으신다고 해서 당황하시지 마시고 일단 FDA가 주장하는 것이 정확한지 차분히 살펴보시는 것이 중요합니다. 마지막은 Manufacturer Distributor Declaration인데 여기서 기억하실 점은 FDA 법상 Manufacture for 또는 Manufacture by 둘 다 쓸수록 되어 있습니다. 이 슬라이드는 기능성 식품에 관한 슬라이드인데요. 오늘 시간상 자세히는 못 다루지만 말씀드리고 싶은 점은 첫 번째, 기능성 식품은 식품으로 분류됩니다. Dietary Supplement는 FDA 법상 식품으로 분류되고 그렇기 때문에 많은 식품 관련 규정들이 그대로 적용됩니다. 하지만 다른 점들이 몇 가지 있는데요. 첫 번째, 여기 지금 슬라이드에 나와 있는 것처럼 Supplement Facts Panel이 Nutrition Facts Panel 대신에 들어가게 되고 비슷하긴 하지만 포매팅이나 어떤 내용이 들어가야 되는지에 대해서 심지어는 들어가야 되는 영양분의 순서도 약간 다르기 때문에 만약에 기능성 식품을 판매하시는 분이 있다면 꼭 이 점 확인하시는 걸 추천드립니다. 두 번째로 다른 점은 CGMP 기준에 있어서 식품 CGMP와 기능성 식품에 관한 CGMP는 굉장히 다릅니다. 기능성 식품에 대한 CGMP는 오히려 식품보다 제약 제품에 대한 CGMP를 더 비슷한 편입니다. 그래서 미국에 수출되는 제품들의 라벨에 있어서 가장 중요한 부분 중 하나가 바로 어떤 효능 표기가 들어갈 수 있는 클라이언트 분들께서 제게 자주 물어보시는 질문 중에 하나인데요. 효능 표기가 중요한 이유는 FDA에서 이 부분을 지적하면서 경고장이나 아니면 수입 금지를 하는 경우가 굉장히 많습니다. 아까 의논한 다른 라벨링 이슈들처럼 FDA에서 이슈를 제기하기 가장 쉬운 부분 중 하나이고요. 그래서 효능 표기에 관한 법령을 숙지하시고 그리고 제품을 미국에 수출하시기 전에 제품의 라벨에 나와 있는 효능 표기가 FDA 법령에 관해서 문제가 없는지 확인하는 것이 중요합니다. 일단 먼저 FDA가 허가한 클레임들 몇 가지 종류를 찾아보자면 첫 번째, 식품 제품에 대해서는 몸의 어떤 기능을 향상시킨다는 클레임 표기를 할 수 없도록 되어 있습니다. 이런 표기를 하게 되면 이 제품의 목적, 그러니까 intended use가 식품이 아닌 제약으로 분류될 수 있고 만약에 그렇게 되면 제품이 식품이 아닌 제약으로서 FDA의 규제를 적용받을 수 있습니다. 그런데 예외가 하나 있는데요. 바로 FDA에서 특별히 허가한 health claim, authorized health claim. 어떤 식품이 어떤 질병의 리스크를 낮출 수 있는 가능성이 있다는 효능 표기입니다. 예를 들어서 슬라이드를 보시면 fiber may reduce the risk of heart disease라고 되어 있죠. 심장 관련 질병 위험을 파이버를 먹으면 낮출 수도 있다. 질병에 대한 표기를 할 수 있다는 점에서 효과적이긴 한데 만족시켜야 되는 요건이 굉장히 많은 편이고 그리고 또 이렇게 허가받는 표기 자체가 많지 않기 때문에 쓸 수 있는 경우가 사실 그렇게 그 다음이 이제 구조 기능 효능 표기 Structure Function Claim인데 어떤 영양분이 인체의 구조나 기능을 유지 또는 보조할 수 있다고 하는 효능 표기를 뜻합니다. 예를 들어서 Calcium builds strong bones 또는 Supports digestion 같은 경우는 인체의 본래 기능을 유지시킨다는 효능 표기이기 때문에 제품 라벨에 사용하는 것이 가능합니다. 근데 조심할 점은 만약에 인체의 본래 기능을 넘어가는 효능 표기가 있다면 제약으로 분류가 됩니다. 예를 들어서 Calcium builds strong bones 대신에 Calcium builds strong bones to help with osteoporosis 라고 한다면 아니면 supports digestion 대신에 improves digestion 이라고 한다면 FDA에서 제약 제품으로 분류해서 문제를 삼을 수 있습니다. 마지막 nutrient content claim 규정이 약간 복잡하긴 한데 요약하자면 어떤 성분의 함량을 nutrient content claim이라고 합니다. 예를 들어서 excellent source of vitamin C 라는 표기가 있다고 했을 때 이것은 비타민의 함량을 excellent 하다고 5mg of vitamin C 이런 경우는 제품에 비타민 C가 얼마나 들어가 있는지를 명시하고 있는 거고요. 그런데 이런 그 excellent 같은 단어를 쓰는 표기의 문제점이 뭐냐면 사람마다 excellent의 레벨이 뭔지 다를 수가 있습니다. 예를 들어서 저는 10g이 있어야 제품에 10g이 들어가 있어야 excellent라고 생각할 수 있고 다른 사람은 5g만 들어가 있어도 충분하다고 생각할 수 있습니다. 그래서 이에 대한 규정이 있습니다. 첫 번째는 excellent 또는 high라는 단어가 들어간다면 일일 섭취 권장량, FDA에서 정한 일일 섭취 권장량의 20% 또는 그 이상이 들어가야 됩니다. 10%나 그 이상만 들어가 있다면 good source 등의 다른 표기를 써야 됩니다. 또 FDA에서 정한 일일 섭취 권장에 있는 영양분에 관해서만 이 nutrient content claim을 사용하는 게 가능한데요. 예를 들어서 오늘 FDA가 허가한 3가지 클레임의 종류에 대해서 알아봤는데 제품을 수출하시기 전에 꼭 이에 대해서 이해를 하시고 그리고 문제가 생길 수 있는 클레임은 제품에서 remove. 다음 슬라이드는 이제 알레르겐 워닝에 관한 내용인데요. 알레르기 성분에 관한 표기는 굉장히 중요합니다. 원래 8개의 성분에 대해서만 알레르기 표기를 하면 됐는데 얼마 전에 법이 바뀌어서 이제 9개에 대해서 해야 됩니다. 추가된 하나의 인그리디언트가 알레르겐 데클레이션에 관한 인그리디언트가 세스미, 그러니까 참깨입니다. 2023년 1월 1일부터 유통된 제품들은 참깨가 포함됐다면 contain sesame 또는 다른 방식으로 알레르겐에 대해서 표기를 해야 됩니다. 알레르겐 워닝이 굉장히 중요한 이유는 FDA에서 가장 민감하게 반응하고 중요하게 생각한 이슈 중에 하나가 알레르겐 성분입니다. 알레르겐 성분이 들어간 식품이 표기가 안 돼 있는 것이 적발되면 수입 금지령에 올라갈 확률이 높고 그 외에 FDA 경고장을 받거나 아니면 어떻게 해서 피해를 입고 소송을 걸어오게 되는 경우도 있습니다. 특히 알레르기 반응이 심한 피넛이나 쉘피쉬의 경우 아까 말씀드린 것처럼 참깨의 경우 1월 1일부터 규정이 적용이 될 텐데요. 지금부터 만약에 참깨를 성분으로 사용하시는 제조사가 있다면 지금부터 성분표와 서플라이 체인 당연히 성분에 참깨가 포함되어 있다면 성분표에 알레르기 되어 있도록 수정을 하셔야 되고요. 그 다음 더 까다로운 경우는 만약에 다른 회사에게 공급받는 성분이 있으시다면 그 성분 안에 참깨가 들어가 있지 않은지 확인하셔야 됩니다. 왜냐하면 이런 경우는 다른 회사가 얘기해주지 않는 이상, 서플라이어가 여러분께 말씀을 해주지 않는 이상 그 해당 제품에 참깨가 들어갔는지 알 수 있는 방법이 없습니다. 그래서 저희가 진행했던 케이스 중에 제조사는 분명히 참깨를 알레르겐을 넣은 적이 없는데 소비자가 알레르겐이 들어가 있다는 것을 찾아낸 경우가 있습니다. 그래서 그것을 더 조사를 한 결과 결국 제3자에게 서플라이어에게 받는 제품에 알레르겐 성분이 표기가 되어 있지 않은 상태로 들어가 있다는 것으로 판명이 되었었습니다. 그래서 지금 시간이 얼마 남지 않았기 때문에 이 과정 오늘 내용들을 정리하자면 라벨링 관련 문제의 경우 사실 문제를 예방하기는 쉽지만 문제가 생기면 해결하기 어렵고 비용도 비싼 종류의 이슈 중에 하나입니다. 그리고 생각보다 이 라벨링 관련 이슈는 많이 문제가 되는데요. 예를 들어서 미국에서 잘 알려진 파네라의 경우 패키징되어 판매되는 콘차우더 제품 중 윗 알레르기가 표기 안 된 것이 발견돼서 제품을 전부 다 리콜해야 하는 일이 일어났었습니다. 그리고 저희 팀도 지난달만 해도 2가지 리콜에 관련된 케이스를 진행했었고요. 생각보다 알레르겐에 대한 이슈가 많이 생기기 때문에 꼭 제품 제조하시고 수출하시는 데 있어서 주의하신 것을 당부드립니다. 그 다음 아까 화장품에 들어간 색소에 대해서도 잠시 의논을 했었는데요. 저희가 지금까지 많은 수의 수입 케이스를 다뤘는데 그중 가장 문제가 되는 것 중에 하나가 화장품에 포함된 불법 색소입니다. FDA는 화장품에서 불법 색소를 발견하면 바로 수입 거절을 하는 것은 당연하고 그리고 많은 경우 곧바로 수입 금지령이 올리기도 합니다. 이렇게 되면 아예 미국에 물건 수출을 못하게 되죠. 방금도 확인했는데 지금 20개가 넘는 한국 화장품 회사가 불법 색소 관련된 수입 금지령이 올라가 있습니다. FDA에서 따로 통보를 안 하기 때문에 이 중 일부는 이유도 모르는 상태에서 수출에 계속 어려움을 겪고 있을 수 있고요. 근데 문제가 이렇게 많이 생긴 이유 중에 하나는 한국에서 허가된 색소와 미국의 FDA에서 허가된 색소가 서로 다르기 때문입니다. 그 다음 미국에서 제품이 유통될 때 자주 문제가 생긴 것 중에 하나가 소비자 소송인데요. 물론 일부는 정당한 이유로 소송을 걸어온 경우도 있지만 상당수의 경우는 문제가 아닌데도 식품회사 켈로그 같은 경우는 Healthy, Nutritious, Whole Grain 등의 표기에 관한 소송을 3년 동안 진행 후 합의하였었는데 합의 액수가 20밀리언, 그러니까 200억 원이 넘어 효능 표기가 중요하긴 하지만 전반적으로는 효능 표기에 대해서는 보수적으로 접근하셔서 소송 같은 문제를 막는 것이 또는 그 리스크를 줄이시는 것이 중요하다고 생각합니다. 그리고 요즘 문제가 되고 있는 것은 바닐라 관련 인그리디언트에 관한 관련 표기인데 일부 소비자분들을 대리하는 변호사들이 진짜 바닐라로 표기할 수 없다고 주장하고 있습니다. 식품 소송도 트렌드가 있는데 요즘은 바닐라에 관한 소송이 트렌드고요. 그러나 이러한 로펌들은 계속 이슈를 제기하는데 한 로펌은 식품에 관해서만 1년에 400개 이상 소송을 제기한 것으로 나타났습니다. 이런 문제를 피하기 위해서는 꼭 수출하기 전에 라벨과 효능 표기를 잘 살피는 것을 추천드립니다. 아까 말씀드렸던 것처럼 예방은 쉽고 해결이 어려운 것 중에 하나가 라벨링 관련된 문제이기 때문에 수출하시기 전에 꼭 자세하게 라벨을 리뷰하시고 FDA 규정과 비교하시는 것을 추천드립니다. 감사합니다. Todd, on to you.
Thank you, Sung. Hello, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today regarding the Consumer Product Safety Commission, or CPSC. The CPSC is the primary federal agency dealing with, as the title implies, safety issues in consumer products. We'll see in a moment how CPSC is an important agency, but not the only agency that you may be dealing with when selling your products in the United States. And we'll be talking about a variety of issues types of questions and issues and concerns that we regularly receive from clients, or types of issues that come up frequently. So just as background, so the CPSC researches products and develops their own standards for them. They work with industry to come up with voluntary standards so they don't just impose standards themselves. They're an educational organization for not only everyone in the stream of commerce, manufacturers, importers, distributors, et cetera, but also with the end use consumers, so that there's transparency in sharing information about the products. And again, with the emphasis on safety. They have an enforcement function so that they can, like the FDA, ban products or recall products. So this is a screenshot from a CPSC webpage, and I put it up because it's a good introduction to show you that it's a way to research and give you some rough idea whether your product is going to be regulated by the CPSC, and if so, what types of regulations might be related to your product. It is not, I emphasize this, it's very important, relying solely on this webpage is not a good tactic, because it tends to be a little conservative. It will not necessarily list exemptions. So there are a lot of times there are products that there's a general rule for regulating them, but there might be a list of products that are exempt, that don't have to comply. This webpage is not going to show you that. Furthermore, it's difficult to have one algorithm cover every product in the world, particularly as companies are constantly developing new products. So a good general start, but not the place to end your research or your due diligence. I put this slide up to show the interrelationship between the CPSC and other agencies. In the last few years, we've had a lot of clients who are selling what they think are consumer products that battle the COVID virus. If they make statements that the product kills the COVID virus, is efficacious about reducing the virus, they may not be regulated by CPSC. They may be regulated by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, because they're killing a virus, and that puts you into a whole different regulatory area. A consumer may purchase a car, but the components of the car, if you are selling automobile truck components, that's more likely to be regulated by the National Highway Transportation and Safety Administration. However, if you're selling consumer products for aftermarket things that might go into a car, those still could be CPSC, so a tricky area. Similarly, if you're selling products that are going into airplanes, Federal Aviation Administration, all products that you're going to be selling, all consumer products will also need to comply with the agency in the upper right, the Federal Trade Commission. Sung and Cori spoke about, they had several slides on listing ingredients in products and contents of products and the weights and measures of products. CPSC generally is not going to regulate that. FTC will. So in this case, with food and drug, you might have one agency, but with other consumer products, you might have to deal with two. Talk about CPSC. The lower page in the middle, U.S. Customs and Border Protection. If you're getting your product in the United States, you're going to have to get it through Customs and Border Protection. That's not a CPSC issue. Different sets of regulations there in terms of sharing information and where the product comes from, its source of origin, that sort of thing. I'm again calling all these out just so you're aware that CPSC is not the only stop. Last, on the lower right, I added this because some states have their own warning and regulatory programs beyond, in addition to the federal standard. And the one that's most prevalent, I think, is usually California. And this is a reference to California's Proposition 65 law. Many of you may be familiar with that. And I put a little warning below. You may be very familiar with these types of warnings. So you could be in compliance with CPSC safety regulations, but not be in compliance with state warning standards dealing with some health impacts from use or exposure to those products or product packaging. CPSC focuses on many things, but one big area is children's products. Obviously, younger people, more sensitive, maybe unable to read product packaging. So there has to be more information for parents or others about how that product should be used. The cutoff is generally for children 12 years of age or younger. And I have several bullet points here about statements made by a manufacturer or how the product is, how the packaging or advertising is issued. If there's a lot of cartoon characters on the product packaging, it's more likely to be for a younger person, or just common recognition by consumers about what might be targeted to children. And that gets into a gray area that we usually have to talk to clients about. There's a subset of standards for even younger individuals, infants and toddlers. So if you're selling very specific products like cribs, pacifiers, bibs that you put around your neck, where there could be a choking hazard, there are standards for children 3 to 6 and under 3. So again, those are separate warnings and standards you would need to be aware of. Typical with children's products are the small parts regulation. There's a general ban on having very small parts or components of a children's product because young children are likely to chew on them, swallow them, choke on them. There is a special regulation for use and abuse testing. Young children are more likely to take things apart, throw them on the floor, try to break them, again, chew on them. So there's other types of safety testing as to how well that product will hold up under normally anticipated use and abuse. There are separate regulations we could guide you through for determining what is the appropriate age labeling. Is this something for 3 to 6, for birth to 3, that type of thing. There is a separate voluntary standard that CPSC recognizes, and this is an example of where they work with private industry on toys for children. That's the ASTM, American Society for Testing Methodology, toy safety standard. And if you are following that, you're likely to be on the right path, and we call that out. I list all of these above because at the bottom bullet point, all of these things must ultimately end up in, for children's products, with a children's product certificate. This has to be based on test results that are performed by a neutral third-party accredited laboratory. CPSC has a list of accredited laboratories. That product certificate, the manufacturer has to be able to give this to the importer to the distributor, et cetera, showing that the product, the children's product, complies with all applicable children's product safety rules. Children's products must also have special tracking information where it's basically explaining the source of the product, the manufacturer or the private labeler's name. It should be affixed to the product or the product pack. Well, preferably both, but we'll see there's an exemption there. It should give where the product is from, date of production, if there's a batch or run number, ways so you can really hone in on if there is a problem with the product, how to get back to the right source to fix the product so that no children are injured. It needs to be fairly visible, legible to the average person. The exceptions here are to the extent practicable. Some toys are so small that you cannot put all this information on the product, but you must at least put it on the product packaging. Lead. Lead historically has been a very common constituent in paints and coatings that go on a variety of consumer products. Lead is known to, exposure to lead is known to be linked to both cancer and to birth defects. So there's an emphasis on removing, eliminating or removing as much lead as possible to get it down to a reasonable concentration. Sometimes it's impossible to get it all out. For children's products, the maximum concentration, the general rule is the maximum concentration is 90 parts per million in the paint or surface coatings. There are some other products, furniture and adult products that may have a higher concentration, but if you're going to use one paint, why would you give the children one type of paint and the adults a different type? Probably best to have everyone with the lower lead surface coating. There are some, and again, you cannot just make the statement yourself. You have to send this out for third-party testing and certification to then share that with downstream parties. I list a number of exceptions here. For example, books and paper-based printing materials, there's a certain amount of lead that goes into the ink that they simply can't get out. Anyway, you can see here why you cannot rely on the CPSC webpage only, because there's a lot of times that the general rule will say one thing, but you may have an exception that allows you more flexibility in your manufacturing. Plastics. So many products are made of plastic these days. Hard, rigid plastic that does not flex is one type of plastic, but the plastic that is flexible, that you can bend and move, has chemicals in it called plasticizers that allow it to bend. A common family of chemicals that allow plastic to bend are called phthalates. Phthalates also, exposure to phthalates also have some detrimental health impacts, birth defects, cancer, that sort of thing. Consequently, the CPSC has prohibited children's toys containing phthalates with more than 0.1%. Now, this again requires testing, certification, accredited laboratories. I've listed the 8 phthalates here that CPSC is focused on. This is a perfect example, however, where state, you also have to be familiar with state regulations. The state of California also regulates all of these phthalates through Proposition 65. So you might be able to meet the CPSC standard for low concentration of phthalate, but if you don't have the proper warning for state of California, you could still be in violation of the Proposition 65 warning for measurable phthalates in the product. Small parts, talked about the small parts, the choking, particularly focused on children under 3 years of age. In the screenshots here, I've shown the size limitations that CPSC is focused on. So again, there's an overall ban, but on these small parts because of young children swallowing them. But there are exemptions because there are some products just by their very nature are small. So balloons, crayons, clay, finger paints, buttons, toothbrushes, and of course eating utensils you're putting in your mouth anyway. So again, there are, I don't want to say ways around this, but there are ways to comply with this law that where you may not have to go through the ban. Batteries. Many products contain batteries, particularly rechargeable lithium-ion batteries seem to be the new trend these days. We don't have enough time to go through every battery standard here, but the emphasis I'm trying to make is that CPSC works with private industry and recognizes all of these battery standards that I've listed down below. If you have a product with batteries in it, whether it requires alkaline batteries that need to be thrown away and repurchased or lithium-ion batteries that need to be recharged, we can walk you through this. We can find the right standard for you to meet so that you can be in compliance with this. And there's some different standards depending upon if you are exposed to the battery or if the battery is sealed inside. Even if the product is not run by a battery, it could be run on electricity. The CPSC isn't necessarily setting its own standards on electronic products, but it works with private industry and recognizes the National Fire Protection Association's electrical safety standard, NFPA 70 standard. This goes with more design and installation of the products, but again, because of this overlap with safety, this is the type of area that you would need to be focused on to make sure you are complying with the regulations. I mentioned COVID-19, and again, so many products in the last 2 years where people have come up with a new and improved way to deal with reducing exposure to COVID. CPSC divides this into 4 areas: face coverings, gowns, gloves, disinfectant, and cleaning supplies. With face coverings, it depends on the type of face covering. So some people who just have a piece of cloth over their face, that type of face covering may be regulated simply as wearing apparel. And we'll see, I believe, in the next slide or two, that there's a flammability standard with cloth that they would have to meet. If the mask is particularly focused on children, then all of those children's standards come back into effect. If the product had some lead content or if there was a choking hazard, you're putting this thing around the child's face and tying it onto their head, different standards there. They would have to, that particular children's mask would have to have a children's product certificate where the first mask would not. If they are medical face masks used in hospitals, that are N95 respirators, I would probably pass you back over to Cori for FDA regulations, although she and I might work on that together. If the mask is used in an occupational setting, it has to meet a standard set by yet another agency. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health has developed a standard for safety in occupational settings, and the Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration is the federal agency that generally regulates safety issues in occupational and work environments. I won't repeat all this for gowns and gloves. You get the sense as to why you can get different outcomes. For disinfectants and cleaning supplies, there are some other laws that you would have that deal with disclosure of ingredients. at a federal level, there's the Poison Prevention Packaging Act and the Federal Hazardous Substances Act. I mentioned with EPA, if you are saying that a product kills a virus, if the mask may prevent the virus from getting through, but if you have a different product and you're saying that use of this product kills the virus, then it becomes regulated as an insecticide, fungicide, and you go under regulation through EPA. For apparel, textiles, a lot of people sell clothing, garments. The primary issue there is flammability. If exposed to an open flame, how likely is the fiber, the cloth, the material going to burn, how quickly? And there are testing methods for that. You send that out and a third-party laboratory can certify to that. However, there are some areas that are exempt where you don't have to go through all of this. And I've mentioned some of them below: acrylics, nylons, polyester, wool type of things. So either those fibers individually or combination of them, you wouldn't have to go through the same type of testing and sharing of information through product warning or labeling. Also, in addition to CPSC, the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, does have some very specific labeling laws for wearing apparel, just to make you aware of that. Art materials for children or adults, they must meet a specific labeling warning standard. Again, this is something developed by industry. It's the ASTM D4236 standard, and it's a procedure for developing labels for art materials, particularly if there's chronic health hazard, so constant exposure to paint or ink and some of the chemicals in the colorants type of thing. They must have a very specific type of label saying that this product conforms with this particular standard. There is also some regulations or guidance about putting additional warnings on the product. So about, as an example I have here, if this product gets in your eyes, wash immediately, or don't, use water, use another, that type of ancillary information that you would want to know about if you're selling art materials. Someone had asked about pet products, and then I didn't understand it was pet food, but I had heard pet products, and pet products is my understanding, are not considered to be a consumer product that would be regulated by the CPSC. However, we have to be very careful about this, because think how many pet products are used or where young children could come in contact with those. So in here, the picture of the dog with the collar, the young child is on the ground, sees the dog with a collar around its neck, maybe takes the collar off and wants to put the collar on. Well, that could become a choking hazard. The other picture, these are all dog chew toys, but they look like stuffed animals to a small baby, and the small child could start to chew on those. So if they have certain chemicals or colorants in them, or paint or coatings on them, that could be a problem for the small child. Some dog toys have batteries in them to make them buzz or jump. So there's a lot of things that, even if you may not be specifically regulated by the CPSC, we might want to talk to you or work with you about, would it make sense to have additional warnings on these products so that you avoid these types of claims? No one wants an injured child, and no one wants to be defending these types of lawsuits. Deodorizers, air fresheners, there was a question I had heard about that. It's a little bit of a difficult question for me to answer without knowing more about the specific product, because there are many kinds. So some types of air fresheners are in spray bottles. There's a pressurized propellant or gas under pressure that pushes it out that could cause some types of regulations to apply to that product. Other deodorizers are combustible. They could be scented candles where there's an open flame. So you can imagine some of the warnings that would, in terms of having an open flame in your house. Other products are more passive. They're They're just sort of a stick, and the deodorant or the air freshener just comes out of it without without having to do anything else to it. While the final group are electric. You actually plug them into the wall, and through the electric charge, they push air freshener out into the room. So again, several things to think about here where you could go down different paths. I refer you back to some of these other laws I mentioned earlier, the Poison Prevention Packaging Act, Federal Hazardous Substances Act, etc. Regardless as to what product consumer product you are selling, whether for adults or for children, if you are getting complaints about your products, you need to very seriously consider your reporting obligations to the CPSC. And I'm not talking about complaints where I used the product 3 times and it broke. That's not what I mean. What I mean is I used this product and my child cut their hand on a sharp edge, or the product smells bad and I'm dizzy, or those types of complaints where there could be a safety issue. There are some very specific regulations about promptly reporting information to the CPSC. If you do it quickly, you can avail yourself of some defenses or reduction in penalties. If you fail to do it properly or promptly, you could have much higher sanctions against you. Speaking of which, for enforcement and recall, so CPSC has a wide ability to enforce its standards and regulations. It can inspect facilities. It can investigate products. It can ask you to produce information to it about the safety features of a product, or if you're saying, here's my children's certificate showing compliance with all children's regulations, and if they question that, they have ability to get that information. The Biden administration has become particularly active in this area. I have some examples here. In the first quarter of this year, they issued 426 minor corrective action issues where you had to stop selling until you corrected a minor problem with the product. They had 74 product recalls in the first quarter of this year. They also have the ability to out and out ban products. Monetary penalties can range widely, can be from very low, not terribly burdensome amounts to some very high amounts that I've shown here. So sometimes up to $120,000 for each violation, up to over $17 million for a series of violations. There are a group of penalty factors that the agency looks at, and we generally will help you develop in terms of this has never happened before. We were cooperative. There was a small number of products involved. There was a potential for severe risk, but no actual severe risk really occurred. These are the kinds of factors that we help clients develop to minimize these penalties. But just an example, just from last week, so this is very fresh, CPSC issued a fine of almost $8 million to a company because they failed to report a little over 100 complaints about some defective exercise equipment that could have caused injuries. Technically, this is not a CPSC slide, but it's a very important area that I wanted to share with you. This is actually something regulated by the Federal Trade Commission. I think Cori and Sung touched on this. So it's very common for a company to make marketing statements about its product. This is a good product, buy this product, here are the good attributes about this product. But if you market, and particularly now more and more about environmental aspects of the product, this product is recyclable, capable of being recycled, or this product is made with all recycled materials already, or this product is all natural or organic, that sort of thing, other types of comments. It's fine to make those statements if they are correct and true, but we've got so many questions from clients who are trying to push the envelope and make statements that maybe can't be proven up or substantiated, and you are subjecting yourself to regulatory scrutiny and to lawsuits by private parties. The new area here is not just making a positive, a statement about a positive environmental aspect of a product, but the new types of cases coming out are people are getting sued for failure to identify negative characteristics about the product. Your mere silence to address a risk or something, and this isn't safety, but this is some other aspect. Some plaintiffs' law firms are trying to file lawsuits and collect money for this failure to identify negative aspects.
Thanks, Todd. And one point I'll add in, just in terms of pet food, Sung walked you through the requirements for human food, which is regulated by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, also regulates pet food as well. So food for cats, dogs, dog treats, other pets is regulated by FDA. The requirements are very similar as to human food. One point to note, Sung mentioned GRAS, or generally recognized as safe standards. Things that are determined to be GRAS for human food are not necessarily GRAS for pet food. And the opposite is true as well. So before you manufacture a product, you need to make sure that what you are manufacturing complies with the various FDA regulations. So as Todd mentioned, we hope that was helpful. And if you have any further questions, we'd be happy to address them offline.